people. Welcome to this week's edition of Beat Beat.
Isn't this a good time for you to discover the great taste of
psychochemical revolution?
Isn't this a good time
beginning with imaginary voyages, early science fiction, and so on, and continuing through what has been done already, what will be done in the near future, and eventually what might be done.
We shall do it on 3 levels. The levels of the body, the mind, and the spirit.
And we're talking about, this is a battle to save the earth. This is a battle to save the world. And
keep the mercy flowing, keep the compassion alive.
So I'm trying to tell you that life can actually be shaped by the people themselves.
Use what you got to get what you need.
Remind the world once again of what it needs to know, which is that the beast has its fleas, and the monolith has its cracks. And it's precisely within those cracks that the temporary autonomous zone comes into being.
Whatever institutions is in your community that are vital to your life, you should control them. You should own and control them. And that made sense to me.
We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace.
And make the people aware that it's their power that makes the change in the course of history and the conditions under which we live.
What's missing is direction, political understanding, and a outline program.
Ended, we want people to gather their wits, to sober up, and to get down to the serious business of destroying the Babylonian Empire. And this is what we must do, and this is our duty. And we feel that we need people with clear heads, sober people who have their wits about them, because we're confronted with murderous, fascist pigs.
And to say, the ultimate motivation for doing all this is not altruism, but self-interest. That I have an interest in other people's freedom. If other people are not free, because I'm implicated in society as a whole, therefore my own freedom is damaged. As long as you can keep that enlightened self-interest, that selfishness, that greediness in the forefront of your mind at all times with a kind of pure glowing light, of desire, then I don't think the temptations of fascism immediately evaporate. You begin to see that it's a shuck, it's a con, it's a masquerade. It's not really going to make you happy.
An elementary lesson began to dawn on us. A lesson that never was taught us in our civics classes, and that lesson was simply that law serves power. Law serves power.
I began to understand through anarchism that there are many forms of oppression. There are big forms of oppression, and then there are micro forms of oppression. And that you have to take all of these into consideration. And if you can take them into consideration, do things to cut down on the ways that we oppress each other, more creativity is unleashed, more power is unleashed, more abilities to organize and fight the various forms of oppression that we're actually under, and to be able to create new forms in the process.
The Panthers are not trying to infect black people with rage. The Panthers are trying to channel in creative ways the rage which already exists.
The third requisite is the ability to control tensions under pressure. and to consistently play in a relaxed, confident, concentrated, and well-coordinated manner.
The pressure of the Babylonian social system on people that forces them to seek escapes from the awesome confrontation that is upon us.
Grasp at the shadow and lose the substance. The common fate of those who hazard a real blessing for some visionary good.
We want land, housing, education, food, clothing, justice, and peace.
Well, the first thing that you're a Panther, and in order to be a Panther, of course, you have to follow the rules and regulations of the Panther. And we don't go to school and beat up anyone, you see, unless we're attacked. Then you defend yourself. But don't go and jump on anyone. And then we place a rank and file among them, you see. You always see natural leaders among kids. And then he is responsible to see that these things don't happen.
Contrary to your impressions,
Imperialists, these fascists, have armies of agents scrounging and crawling all over the planet Earth, making trouble for progressive forces. And they are finally focused in on us here, and they're trying to move against us. They're trying to destroy us here.
This is crazy. I mean, at the end of the day, is there any place that anybody can run and hide at this point from? You know what I'm saying? With the way things are going, it just sounds like, I've heard people say, well, where are we going to go? There's no place for us to go. What are we going to do? Now, here's the key question I'd like to ask you. Is it our battle, man, to fight this? Or is it our battle to maneuver around it?
That was our summer of pilgrim wandering. We wandered from Mexico down through the Caribbean to the French islands, the British islands, looking for 1 square mile of ground on this planet, where we could live quietly, expand our own consciousness, contribute handsomely to the country in which we live. But such a place was not to be found, free from political or religious interruption. If today I could find 1 square mile of ground on this planet, there would be several 100,000 people who would be willing and eager to join our exploration. But no such place seems to exist. For the first time in human history, there seems to be no land of exile or immigration where groups of people sharing unpopular spiritual beliefs and practices can remove to live in peace. Our own country, you remember, was founded by exactly such small groups of religious exiles. Why is it that every generation forgets this lesson of the past? Why is it that each generation harasses and persecutes its gentlest, wisest, and holiest men, exactly those men that succeeding generations will revere? The answer to this question has nothing to do with intelligence or social prejudice or conservatism. The answer is neurological. The nervous system of the adult human being is so set up that it registers intense neurological pain when confronted with an idea or method which liberates man from his addiction to symbols, from his addiction to the current tribal symbol system.
So black people this year, young black people, like Thomas Smith, John Carlos, mounted the victory stand, which they rightfully won, and wearing black gloves, black socks, no shoes. And when the Star Spangled Banner was played, they clenched their fists in an act of defiance, saying that, yes, we are black. Carlos likened the white attitude toward black athletes to the relationship between trainers and show horses or elephants. If we do a good job, he said, they'll throw us some peanuts or pat us on the back and say, good boy.
We just want to let black people throughout the world know, that we ran representing them. We're trying to tell black people and minority people that they're going to have to become more united to stand against the struggles that they have in front of them. And all the words in the national anthem didn't cover black people or minority people. And I didn't feel that I should go up there and stand up in attention and applaud something I disagree with totally. I'll be being hypocritical to myself.
After Tim made the sound with Asherah Temple 7-Up Trip and turned into the synthesizer vibes of Dieter Dirks, we've got modern recording equipment, all the best speakers and recording equipment we could get, and decided to get into the synthesizer.
Down, down, down to the pockmarked lunar face.
The moon, too, is turning to be full of surprises. Although, of course, many of the things we expected to find on the moon have turned out to be precisely that. For example, we've always been saying that the lunar soil is going to be much made of the same materials as the Earth, and this has proved to be precisely the case. But until quite recently, of course, we were worried about whether there were large areas of dust in which we might sink, and we now know this is not the case.
As they come over the lunar horizon,
it is an adventure in a very different world than we ordinarily live in.
There are some stars which pulsate, and some stars which explode.
Precious scientific discoveries about the nature of space.
When I get in the electromagnetic world, there's no such thing as space. I simply have what I have tuned in now, and that's what we're conscious of, and I can tune it out and bring it back in again.
So leave recorders running and get your heavy metal ass in the spaceship. Did it. Nothing here now but the recordings on Earth.
First in 1965 and then again in 1969, NASA sent spacecraft to fly by Mars and send back scientific measurements and close-up photographs.
This is picture 21, a red picture, wide-angle picture, fantastic picture. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Look at those little craters. This is a narrow-angle camera view.
We, by a gift called dying, born, must grow
into a new kind of man, the astronaut.
Well, if an astronaut steps off the centrifuge and describes his experiences, all the words in the world can't really tell me what he felt, but if I had gone through the same experience on the centrifuge, I would know. He wouldn't have to tell me.
Nevertheless, the special effects and the spacecraft, all the different types of space stations and space vehicles, are only the background for the theme of the film, which is man and the universe, or if you like, man and God, and that's the interpretation many people have put on it.
I am in a big mass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up, like they're luminescent. I never saw anything like it. They're coming by the capsule, and they look like little stars, a whole shower of them coming by.
When all of us space travelers really get going.
His arms are raised above his head as he greets the mothership.
And we are looking up at the stars. We see beyond them. We see much farther beyond them. We're going to move beyond them, even if that means moving over them or through them. But we're going to go past them because they stand between us and the Garden of Eden brought down to earth.
Our first stop, the gateway to heaven that spins you skyward on the great space wheel. The fabulous Gateway, where you guide your own rocket and taxi to tomorrow.
Bitte kommen. Bitte kommen.
Hallo, Luna 3, wir hören euch. Hallo, Luna 3, wir hören euch. Minus 2, plus 5. Kurs normal, Kurs normal.
Hey, there's a void here.
Well, I'm still deeply wedded to the effort to love through the darkness, which is to say to love oneself and love others through the darkness of space and time. Our lives have to move from womb to tomb.
And this is where these fantastic radio signals, emissions rather, that have been detected in the last few months are so fascinating, because it looks as though this may be an attempt at communication. We can't find any natural explanation yet for these very rhythmic pulses.
That means we can go on to the second level, the level of the mind.
There are programs that are right in this room, and 2 million programs right here. 2 million programs going through your head right now. So if you had the right equipment in your head, you could pick up any one of them if you want to tune in on them.
The noise of 25,000 stereo sets playing full blast.
Giving you the unknown, using the known.
Merely repeating to yourself the right key word at the proper time is all that is required.
Word on the streets.
Communicate while walking around alive to all of the nations. Never had that.
But then we abstract it, and then we don't even know what he's talking about. We just think it's wild. He broke through the artificial structure of verse that they put around it, which runs you away from it. So, I mean, it's a literary discussion, but actually it's not literary at all, is it? Because it's talking about real life.
Again, false dichotomy, false dichotomy, bzz, 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 false dichotomy.
It's not in accordance with this system of thing, or any system of thing in any country. You might say most people are talking about life. They want to be, I'm not talking about that. And most people are talking about death. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that's the third thing that's entirely different from, I'm not seeking eternal life and I'm not seeking eternal death. You can look at this. So the third thing is this, I just call it myth, because if it's not life and it's not death, people don't know anything else, so you would have to call it something that's impossible, I would say, the myth. So that's why I say myth science, because I'm dealing in equations that makes it a science, to prove that this is it, as far as balanced equations are concerned.
Oh boy. Right. Again. Let X equal X. You know, it could be you. It's a sky blue sky. Satellites are out tonight. Let X equal okay, this is X, 0, 0, 0, 0. Oh yeah, PS.
The letter X stands for your selected target. You shut out all outside noises and distractions as you concentrate easily and effectively upon your shot.
And if I don't sound right, that is to say, clearly coming from dead center, this is what you should do.
Join the famous detective as he combines the wisdom of the East and the science of the West in a dramatic chapter from The Adventures of
Two phono plugs, red and black, feeding in stereo signals.
People be doing this and they be doing that and they be doing that because they want to make everything in the present tense like Africans do. They want everything to be present because everything is in the present. Even when you talk about the past, it's in the present because you couldn't talk about it unless it was in the present. The future's in the present because it's you talking about it. That's why I said they be doing this and they be doing that and they be doing that. They be doing it. But that's African syntax.
And I use that rhetoric because that's the way it is, not for any exotic reasons.
It is important to recognize that all of us have been conditioned
to respond automatically to certain key words in our vocabulary.
Like I said, words have to be planted in the air. Like you plant some seeds down the ground, you can plant words in the air. Now I'm talking about something that it might have been mentioned.
To broaden our movement and to take over the machinery that they're using now to oppress people and use it to liberate all people of the world, including ourselves. Thank you very much.
Only stereophony can give us such clear and realistic movements.
If you can detect them at all, then in some way there must be some kind of interaction possible with them. In that case, theoretically, you can modulate them, and theoretically, if you can send a signal, you can do anything.
Live and on the air right now.
Sound reproduction
can take down and set up your entire system.
The techniques and repetitive word patterns of this recording have been selected for and are directed to your subconscious rather than to your conscious mind.
Ordinary communications and network radio and TV will have sunk far below the threshold of noise, probably before it reaches the limits of the solar system. It's only the high-powered radars that could probably be detected over interstellar distances.
The equipment used to make your records has this extended frequency response, and only by using comparable equipment to play them back can you hear with true fidelity.
Exact resemblance to exact resemblance, the exact resemblance as exact as a resemblance. Exactly as resembling, exactly in resemblance, exactly a resemblance, exactly and resemblance. For this is so because
this machinery that we have in our hands is revolutionary machinery.
It vibrates the innards of anybody standing within
vague language versus concrete language, static language versus action language, verbal language, how vague language supports the status quo.
Because it's full of things that are only correct because they're grammatical, but they're tough on the ear. You see, this is a very wearying one. It's unpleasant to read.
Well, it depends on the rate of signaling you're prepared to accept.
The radio and all the different lengths of frequencies, of wavelengths of electromagnetic waves.
You get the swoop of the frequencies coming up.
The high priest of the revolution.
Now have the capability not only to get everybody in the afterlife life, but we can take care of everybody in this life too.
Go then with God's peace in your heart, His life flowing in and through yours.
This is the real thing. This is the name of the game.
What that is the whole thing about being in it and out of it at the same time. You know what I mean? Being in it and out of it at the same time.
I realized that it was within my power to select and play almost any game, or even to deal myself out of games entirely.
It is not within the scope of this recording to teach you anything about the game that you do not already know. Rather, it is designed to condition you to play your game in a relaxed, confident, concentrated, and well-coordinated manner.
If you can select any game, why not pick the most exciting and challenging game around? With full knowledge, of course, that all human games end in a tie.
Well, this is primarily the theme of this movie, and which is one of the things that's caused so much controversy and surprised and sometimes shocked and puzzled a few people who are not used to thinking in these terms. The theme of the movie is really man's place in the hierarchy of the universe. Where are we in the pecking order, which extends all the way from apes to angels and perhaps beyond?
And to say, yeah, I mean, the ultimate motivation for doing all this is not altruism, but self-interest. That I have an interest in other people's freedom. If other people are not free, because I'm implicated in society as a whole, therefore my own freedom is damaged. As long as you can keep that enlightened self-interest, that selfishness, that greediness in the forefront of your mind at all times with a kind of pure, glowing light, of desire, then I don't think the temptations of fascism immediately evaporate. You begin to see that it's a shuck, it's a con, it's a masquerade. It's not really going to make you happy, and in fact, it's all about bad sex. It's always about bad sex, about making bad contacts with other people.
The aim of the game is to feel real good. The aim of the game is to feel real good. The aim of the game is to feel real good.
The third requisite is the ability to control tensions under pressure and to consistently play in a relaxed, confident, concentrated, and well-coordinated manner.
Play as time goes by.
That we hear the word, that things are socially constructed, even identity, class, whatever, which basically means that none of this stuff was like there from day one. These are all attempts of people to understand who we are at any given time, and that changes. What is black? What is Africa? What is Europe? There was a time where there was no Africa, there was no Europe.
Here is the first sound.
Pulsing more accurately than any normal, even electronic timekeeper.
Elements are beginning to vibrate and radiate.
In that sense, we see rhythm as fundamental, rhythm as the heart.
The last stronghold of the ancient ways.
Motivated by revolutionary love.
When two seemingly disparate elements are imaginatively posed, put in apposition in new and unique ways, startling discoveries often result.
So, all right, James Brown and John Baudrillard. What a pair.
Sort of combining of surrealism and national liberation consciousness.
Psychedelic revolution.
The idea of people leaving persecution, seeking out freedom, and the ability to achieve their full potential.
The science side or the artificial side has made such tremendous progress, and then when you look at human beings, they haven't made any progress. They still have their little chalices, and they still following the same traditional futilities.
The pressure of the Babylonian social system on people that forces them to seek escapes from the awesome confrontation that is upon us.
Medieval politics was not the uncontested arena you conclude from reading theology. As against the Platonic descending theory of power, where dependent vassals are always less justified and less perfect than their superiors, there was also a popular ascending theory of power, in which rule was justified by its reflection of the will of the people. In medieval philosophy, this democratic impulse was registered as nominalism, a repudiation of Platonic forms and a recognition of the irreducible singularity of real people, real things, and real beer.
Is what makes it revolutionary. Because what Shakespeare is talking about actually is the ascendancy of the merchants, the elimination of the feudal empire, the elimination of the kings. He's showing you why these kings need to be slaughtered.
We used to say to create a new man, but for me to say create a new man is not appropriate in this day and age. But we want to create new human beings. We want to create a more conscious human being today.
I want you to realize the great unchanging truths.
The ticking of an ancient timepiece, which ourselves have been listening to millions of years before clocks were invented.
If we stop your fundamental rhythm, then we have to talk about you in the past. Because that's the only thing that connects you with this, is that rhythm.
A faint, baby-like bleat, transmitted by radio from 200 miles out in space, signals to the world the birth of a new age.
This is one world. We are all one part of the human race.
But now that the psychedelic battle has been won, where do we go next?
And there is no one answer, which is the thing that I learned. There's no one answer. We got to work it out as we go.
Then the dire prophecies may come true, and great suffering will be across the land.
That's not the future that we are fighting and dying for.
Our time
is a time for crossing barriers, for erasing old categories, for probing around.
And at the end of that nothingness, there is again something else.
We must confront the ultimate facts of human existence, which means we must death, dread, despair, disappointment, disillusionment, and how does somehow we forge some joy, some courage, some vision, some compassion in the face of those ultimate facts.
You got to talk to each other and get together. And you are not going to do it by rage. You are going to do it by getting together with a common task and building something.
If you're not going to stop hustling, can you hustle for the people?
Because they're trying to tell you that life can actually be shaped by the people themselves.
When the demos, especially working in poor people, reach the conclusion that they can make a difference by organizing and mobilizing, the ice age is over and difference towards social misery is brought to an end, and the melting begins, the hot moment begins, which is to say that's what that's what democracy is about, right? It's with those voices coming forward. But usually when the voices come forward, things begin to shake.
You can see this slowly evolving change taking place right now.
It's another life going on in America, parallel to the so-called official society.
And that sort of wave will spread over the whole country, but by the time the wave gets back to the center again, it won't be just negative. That there'll be something positive coming with that wave too, some utopia.
The idea of people leading persecution, seeking out freedom, and the ability to achieve their full potential.
To live to our fullest is to win.
Look good, have fun, feel fit.
Hold it, hold it, hold it, and release.
There will always be anxiety. There'll always be insecurity. There'll always be bigotry. There'll always be venom and vitriol and so forth. The aim is not to eliminate those things. To be human is to be thrown in time and space and thereby wrestle with that anxiety. The question is, how do we minimize? How do we alleviate? How do we attenuate these inescapable realities?
And I prefer Taoist dialectics, where there's always a third term, what Michel Serres calls the third term, the parasite, or what Brian Geisen called the third mind. There's always a third term in this dialectic. And the third term here is desire. The politics of desire will decide the question between the primitivists and the futurists. And if it turns out, in the event of this utopian world struggling to be born, that there are people who want to make, who desire silicon chips so much that they themselves will make them, and not oppress some poor woman in Taiwan or some Mexican, worker to make the silicon chips for 75 cents an hour. If the desire is that much, then we will have silicon chips. And if we desire wilderness in that way, we will have wilderness, and maybe we'll have both. Maybe it's conceivable that there'll be both. It's a rough utopia to envision, but I can wrap my mind around it. I can see it.
Keep the mercy flowing, keep the compassion alive.
As soon as you realize that's your fundamental core competency, I look forward to the movies that you'll tell yourself in the future.
And if you know what you want, go after it. Why not?
Now, what is it you want? In your depths of your ignorance, what is it you want?
We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present-day society. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace.
Structures of decision-making, structures of working that continually brings in more people into the process, that brings in people to make decisions, not the most enlightened folks making decisions for others or most enlightened folks representing others, but for people themselves to create all kinds of structures where they are the ones making decisions. It is really their voice. And I didn't get that from other ideologies. I got that from anarchism.
This kind of anarchism that we're involved in does see itself as having the right to criticize both right and left.
It is true that human knowledge and technology is capable of providing
not just the people on the face of the planet Earth today, but millions and millions more with a very beautiful, qualitatively beautiful standard of living, a life, the only life that we're going to know.
Now actively repeat it all. Now actively repeat it all. Now actively repeat it all.
Go on. Go with us.
The Vanguard Party of educating the people in the means through which they could deal with their problems. This was the point.
But as a matter of fact, the Black Power movement per se was not an exclusive movement. There were people of all racial, ethnic backgrounds involved in that movement. There was a connection with global movements. And there was a connection with the Young Lords, the Brown Berets, the American Indian movement. We were part of a global revolution. There was no question about the importance of making those connections and building those bridges.
Look at Malcolm X. They only killed Malcolm X when he realized it wasn't Whitey, it was Super Whitey, you know. And once he was black and white could work together against Super Whitey, against, you know, the real rulers of the world, then they killed him because he was already very successful by that point. So the point is, right now, we know right now that the same people that have been messing with black people have been messing with white people.
It's all along the lines of seizing power. Huey defined power as the ability to define phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner.
I realized that it was within my power to select and play almost any game, or even to deal myself out of games entirely. I decided at that time that the game I wanted to play was to become the holiest and wisest man of my generation. Specifically, to expand and elevate the consciousness of the entire human race.
We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present-day society.
The basic principle that we must work on is that every man, woman, and child on the face of the planet Earth deserves the very highest and the best standard of living that human knowledge and technology is capable of providing, period.
The Garvey movement, the African Blood Brotherhood, the whole rise of an anti-imperialist movement around the world. See, when you're talking about the beginning of the 20th century, you're talking about what? The whole beginning of imperialism and the whole anti-imperialist movement around the world.
People who are angry and filled with rage and express that rage in these senseless outbursts are now beginning to get a rhetoric and an ideology which begins to explain the nature of their situation. And out of that explanation comes a new kind of understanding in terms of an understanding of what has created the situation and what maintains it.
I feel that black people in America lost the sense of beauty, have been deprived of beauty so long, and that they almost don't have appreciation for it. They don't feel that it's profitable, and that's very bad when people get like that. It's not natural. So I would just establish places where it would be, they'd be rehabilitated to putting beauty in that. It would awaken that sense of beauty, because it's very bad to have people around who don't appreciate art. And I've checked it through research, and a lot of black people haven't had an appreciation of art. They don't back the artists up, and they don't back musicians up who are on the intellectual plane and who really care about their welfare in an orderly manner. They don't do that.
Psychology very often is used to explain away the students and is not used as a method for analyzing, say, the intransigence of bureaucrats.
Beware of heartless them. Given the scalpel, they dissect a kiss, or sold the reason they undream a dream.
They are independent of their own consciousness because they exist in the real world.
It is important to recognize that all of us have been conditioned to respond automatically to certain key words in our vocabulary.
There are programs that are right in this room, and 2 million programs right here. 2 million programs going through your head right now. So if you had the right equipment in your head, you could pick up any one of them if you wanted to tune in on them.
It's not some kind of mystical genetic thing. It has to do with society itself.
People don't relate to vast plans of great new societies or tremendous analyses, long dissertations. They have to deal with basic problems, and the program of the party has to be basic.
Even after the revolution, we'll have to get through the night, in other words. We'll have to fall in love. And if you fall in love, you're going to have some deep pain and sorrow as well as some joy and ecstasy. Yes, indeed, indeed.
We have to think long term. We can't just think short term. We can't just think about stopping this war. We have to think about ourselves too. You know, we got work to do with ourselves too, inside of ourselves.
When so much of your energy is devoted to exploring the evils of the system, the deficiencies of the establishment and the like, to what extent you are aware of your own deficiencies, and I'm using you in a very broad sense, not just personally.
When I started reading Eric Fromm, Wilhelm Reich, and some of the other folks that was out of Freud school but were much more radical. And their thing was to, well, I know first it was to build, see if they could build a bridge between Marxism and psychology, you know, but to deal with the internalized oppression, which Frantz Fanon talks about a lot. And why it's important for me is that it has a chance to get us out of being so political. You know, that everything is just so political that we don't even deal with our own internalized shit. That those things that matter in terms of living, and this is why I talked about relationships before. I don't care if it's a relationship with a lover, a family relationship, relationships with your friends. They all got our baggage in them. And that there are certain forms of radical psychology and psychiatry that can give us some insights into how to deal with it. We're trying to build movements, we're trying to build revolution, and don't see how we are sometimes the ones who are destroying it. It's easier to blame COINTELPRO for destroying our movements and not see how we treat each other. You know, that plays a big part. And how we treat each other has a lot to do with our upbringing. For me personally, like I'm a typical macho guy coming up. Pop showed me how to fight at an early age because he didn't want me to be a sissy, right? Love my pops, you know. But it also fed right into my shields that I put up. So I go to prison, there's another shield. You got to have a certain front, you know. You come out, you want to develop relationships, you know, which is what this is all about, you know. But I can't seem to put the shield down. So how can I live to the fullest? How can I be all that I can be, not the army one, you know, but with all this stuff that I got, you know. So a part of me becoming a better revolutionary has got to be also me working on my internal shit. During the course of these struggles, I have got to find ways of dealing with that. Some of it can be done better if you're in a community of like-minded, like-hearted folks. Other folks may need some more professional help, and I don't think that folks who consider themselves activists or revolutionaries should like be so above that they can't go to somebody who's professionally trained in it. You know, there's folks around, you know, and probably some of the revolutionaries, activists, you know them, are in it and can recommend to you, you know, like, well, why don't you check this person out? Check that person out. We need to do that because we suffer. We got wounds, you know, and we got stuff layer under layer under layer that frustrates a lot that we want to do, that can make for very bad relationships with the very folks in our organizations that we need to have very strong creative bonds with.
Attracted just the hard, young, crazy brothers off the block that didn't have nothing to do, hate the man, hate the power structure, gonna do something anyway. They're the ones that dug the party. But Huey didn't just take them off to run off in crazy action. He educated them, disciplined them, trained them, points of law, and in how to deal with a weapon. And he gave them direction, gave them a purpose. This is the basis of the party. And from this, we went on to organize and attract more and more and more people till at this point you have the mothers organized in support of the Panthers, boycotting, taking things to the city council, taking demands, operating on a level that they feel they can operate in the program of the Black Panther Party.
Because he delivered it to me in rhythms that connected up with my rhythms.
Black Americans are undergoing a psychological revolution. Considering its implications, the wonder is that up to now it has been so peaceful.
They were working very industrious in school, and because Panthers always get the highest grades in school, and they're always the smartest guys. So they went for this.
Reaching the temples and releasing.
With the whole of the created universe, at one with its Maker and our Father.
Lord of the desert, Lord of the heavens, Sovereign of eternity.
You are light. You are sound.
In that sense, we see rhythm as fundamental, rhythm as the heart.
And I like her sexuality. I like her paganism, the whole thing. Great.
Exploring without the pressure of time and space, the endless realms within would flash into lightning view.
Tim saw the 7-up record as a mandala, a kind of modern conception of a mandala, with a script to go with it.
It's as if they are repeating a ritual, a text. You're repeating it, see? Now,
I want you to realize the great unchanging truths.
Look within. Find your own divinity. Detach yourself from social and material struggle.
No, replied one old religious leader who speaks and understands English. We do not need these things. We follow the instructions of our Great Spirit who rules over all this land. We continue to care for our Mother Earth. We do our duties and our religious ceremonies. Only the Spirit has authority to tell us what to do.
In his knowledge, nobody has ever played with the deity, he told me. Thus, it was extraordinary.
Everything happened at once.
Time when the conjunction of weird electronics, outer space, and consciousness expansion were sort of reaching their apex. And this really comes down to that fundamental category of the cosmic. Not outer space, not just galactic, but the cosmic.
You can't represent infinity unless you touch the past too, at least some reflections of it anyway.
Coming out of the Black Panther Party and being in prison, it means that you're automatically going to do reflection on what happened in the Black Panther Party. Now, when I started to apply some of these Marx anarchist analysis to the Black Panther Party, some things became clear that I wasn't able to see before. Like my love for people like Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale and Eldridge Cleaver, but not being able to see that we had set them up on a pedestal where they could do no wrong. That if someone sets themselves up to be your leader and make all the decisions for you, what does that say about you?
I am now in the centre as well, and I've brought the metronome with me, which should locate the sound even more clearly.
Sound first. Sound. That's what some religions say told us that the world came into existence. The first thing was what? Sound. Others say it was light.
The black people in America, possibly some other countries, particularly here, have been put over into that similitude, I said, of having no beginning. And the nations of the world did it. Because when they put them in slavery and cut them off, they made them so they have no beginning. So therefore they have the potential of having no end. Because they already got the first thing, which is having no beginning. Because they can't prove they had a beginning, because there are no records of their ancestry. Although they say they came from Africa, can't prove it, really.
Have you ever seen a good media map of the world? I saw one recently that had not one line drawn into Africa. I mean, it was astonishing. Not one. I mean, you'd think there'd be at least a satellite link up or something. Not one.
So therefore, these people are into a similitude or brotherhood with the creator of the universe because they don't have a beginning, just like him. And possibly the reason they're in this condition because they kept on bothering and wanted to be like him.
He is and as he is and as he is and he is. He is and as he and he and as he is and he and he and he and he.
The ending of the movie, where we get into metaphysics, if you like, and certainly philosophical and religious thoughts, this is where the controversy arises.
Fundamentally, it has to do with our human predicament, that we're trapped in time, we're trapped in space, and we're frightened, we're crying for help, like that wonderful first chapter of in Miss Lonely Hearts, Nathaniel West. Help! Help! And the question is, when we cry for help, will we end up putting others down, or will we actually put our hands out and create some solidarity?
Sir, we're going to give you that answer.
Analogy to show that everything in life is connected, everything in the
free world. Convicts call this out here the free world. After you're behind those walls for a while, I guess it starts looking like the Garden of Eden.
The Great Spirit still rules over this land,
filled with a bizarre, unearthly light.
the last stronghold of the ancient ways.
In the future, the educated man will be the one who can move his consciousness deliberately, planfully, and precisely from one level to another for specific and harmonious purposes. The religion of the future will be based, as were the religions of the past, upon the human body and the myriad wonders within this temple.
And now relax right through the body.
I hope that you have an armchair in which you can comfortably relax, in which you can lean your head back, and if you have a stool at your feet to rest your legs completely, so much the better. First, though, a little word of introduction. First, then, our bodies.
They are independent of their own consciousness because they exist in the real world.
No matter how good the simulation is, it will never be the world. It'll never be the body, and it'll never be bodies meeting other bodies.
Respect can only happen face to face, which is such a big thing when you're reading anarchist literature. Face to face democracy, direct democracy, face to face. If you're not dealing with that, then you're not respecting me.
Waking up every morning and squeezing the slave out of ourselves so that the blood of a human being will flow in our veins. Perennial process, actually.
Somewhere, somehow, the rush of the blood in your veins and the verbal reflections of your intellect must find a crossing point.
The toes, the instep, the heels and the ankles, the calves, the knees, the thighs and the buttocks, the pelvis, the tummy, the waist and the diaphragm, all the way around the rib cage, right along your spine, across the shoulder blades, up into the back of the head and the neck, fingers and thumbs, wrists and elbows, forearms and upper arms, neck and throat, chin and lips, teeth and tongue, jaw, nose, cheeks and ears.
Can you let your heart pump you down long red tunnels?
If we stop your fundamental rhythm, then we have to talk about you in the past. Because that's the only thing that connects you with this, is that rhythm.
The good oxygen you have taken in is now flooding your bloodstream, bringing new life as it courses down through your arteries into every part of your physical being.
It's people's lives that generate ideas. Unless you want to go back to some Hegelian or metaphysical thing where you think that people drop out of ideas. I think ideas drop out of people.
You see your mother as a symbolic creature, but she's actually a bundle of millions and millions of sense organs, of sensory cells.
So thanks for joining us. We're here with Ben Blohowiak, and we're going to discuss his piece, The Silver Panthers of Luna. Maybe, Ben, you'd like to kind of walk us through the genesis of the work and how you kind of came up with this idea that you called a kind of speculative ethnography?
Yeah, sure thing. My initial inspiration was sort of a question that bubbled to the surface as I was exploring different things in the 60s counterculture. And once I sort of struck a realization that the sort of fear that Nixon had of there being a counterculture that was putting America at risk, and that Timothy Leary and the Black Panthers were a part of it and may in some way be in cahoots. The more that I learned the actual historical facts of what transpired, the less that theory seemed to carry water. There wasn't a well-coordinated, integrated effort between those parties to change the culture of America. It was more of like a mix that had folks together in time and place, but they weren't necessarily cooperating intentionally or coordinating intentionally. So I was thinking, okay, well, what if there's this alternate history scenario? What if they did? What if the Black Panthers and Timothy Leary, like really in earnest and successfully joined forces to try to have some kind of countercultural insight or progress? And as I sort of percolated on this idea, rather than saying like, okay, what if they had some kind of like successful revolution of American culture or global life, I started to think more in terms of an off-world utopia. And so this already kind of bizarre premise was then set in like a lunar colony. So that would be like an okay place to really, sort of dream big. But at the same time, it wasn't just my fantasy that I wanted to fuel. I wanted to sort of remain true to what I'm going to think of as a source text, but are things that really happened, things that people really said. And so that sort of speculative ethnography has, in this work, this element of collage, where primary sources, folks are speaking in their own voices. And of course, the way that it's recontextualized might make them say things or might imply that they mean things that they didn't. But in this new context, hopefully it can tell the story of what may have happened or what might have come. There's that Bill Burroughs quote, cut it up to see what's really there.
Right.
That would probably be my most succinct response. But of course you can get into it, and the fact that it's not a completely sort of it's not a randomized cut up. I mean, there's a lot of editorializing through editing, I guess, to coin a phrase. So I mean, I made a lot of choices, and what resulted is this hybrid of the historical primary sources, my interpretations, as well as sort of serendipitous juxtapositions that I've cherry picked to support my understanding of like a plausible projection into an alternate future, an alternate present. Well, I think that I might say that I was serving an ego function, because I was mediating between perhaps the unconscious stuff and then the super ego, where the whatever's happening in the unconscious has to find expression and be dealt with by and in some way sublimate to the broader world, which I think in this strained metaphor might be the audience. So folks who listen to this, what are they going to think? How's that going to work? I guess it's a superego consideration. So maybe I'm contradicting myself, but that idea of trying to mediate between those poles, I guess, is sort of how I might see myself. I think the proof may be in the pudding as far as is it comprehensible to a listener? Do they come away with an impression of what's being described or portrayed, or these various voices, these messages convey a unity of impression, even though there might be heterogeneity within it? Like, do you come away with a sense of something that may not have necessarily been there before? I think that may be the test to answer that question. I think that one of the things process-wise that was really important to me was to engage in the sort of discovery and collection of the source material, and not make sure, or what I tried to avoid doing was have a foregone conclusion. Like, I wanted the material to be able to speak for itself and not try to like force it to say something. So there was that element of discovery where, like, okay, as I go, I'm doing this as I go, so that my ending point isn't way after I have stopped collecting the source material. If you think of like in film production, you got, your pre-production, you're shooting, and then you edit. It wasn't like that. Like, I was editing as I was collecting. So that way I would continue to discover, and these like different juxtapositions and interpretations would spontaneously occur, or would occur, so that it would continue to be a process of discovery for me. So if I'd go into a particular audio archive, and I mean go in virtually, because I obtained all this stuff through the internet, then I would integrate it into this emerging whole, this emerging mass of clips that I had. And then once I had what I felt was like a general framework, and what I considered to be too long, or too many clips, then I would sort of whittle them down to be more succinct, a little tighter. And then that was kind of like, well, I guess this is it. And that was sort of that process.
Have you worked like this before, or have you made other speculative ethnographies?
I would say not so much as far as the speculative ethnography is concerned. I mean, this was the first time that I really had that kind of, there was like a concreteness to it. At other times I've had much more abstract or thematically driven experimentation as far as sampling things is concerned, or putting things together. When I was a teenager and I was in college, I was really influenced by sociologists who would engage in collage as a method, but my own participation or emulation of that, compared to this, was always more oblique. This is the most literal of what I personally have done. I can see doing it again, but again, I feel like that aspect of discovery, it comes from that element of curiosity and inspiration. So I was like, well, how do these things fit together? How would they fit together? If I'm not driven by that question, then I don't know if I would have the same drive or the same interest. I think if I knew the answer to that question, I'd make it. But you know, if I chew on it for a little bit, I'm sure I could generate some. I mean, that might be a good mission for me at this point, is to like really reflect on that, because I mean, I think there's value not only in entertainment value or educational value with regard to the sources, but also like I think that part of what makes this worthwhile for me as a process is to then turn back and say, okay, how does this inform my understanding of the situation I find myself in here and now, socially, politically, and that's not my personal insight. I think that's part of the idea of the collage ethnography. Like I think of like James Clifford, you know, talking about that, for example. So I would like, whatever it is, I would like it to make alien what I would consider sort of my home culture and my home experience. You know, it didn't. I mean, it had been, I guess, 7 years at that point, and there were other things on my mind. You know, I think in a general way, of course, the themes of the piece, like, I think the themes are clearly relevant, you know, which is why you're bringing it up. But I mean, in for me, it was sort of in the rearview mirror. It was like I'd done this research, I had listened to this thing, I had created this thing, and this other stuff was new. And I think since then, when I've listened to it, yes, it has occurred to me, but it wasn't my awareness of that event at the time. I didn't think, oh, you know, this reminds me of that thing I did. No, yeah.
What that feels like.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, those are kind of different. The completion and the satisfaction. Where I mean, as soon as I felt quote unquote done, I was second guessing it. I was second guessing myself in releasing it. But and I continue to sort of, you know, wince or think about like what I could have done differently. But I think for me, as far as process is concerned, that thing of like, well, I have a question. This is a way for me to have a feeling that I have answered it. Because no one's going to sit here and tell me. It's not like there's a book I could go read that I'll be like, oh yeah, I really get this, you know. So I had to do it. I had to come up with it. So it was like a DIY answer this question, and that was the answer I came up with. And engaging in the process, and I can only imagine what the product is like to someone who didn't engage in the process. But engaging in the process, which led to the product, I feel like I have a pretty good handle on, for me, what the answer to that initial question was. Yeah, I mean, there's something of, it's a bit of a trope, or, you know, the alien anthropologist, but there's also it's sort of an archetypal element to it as well, where sort of being able to observe from afar, like not necessarily be a member of something. I feel like that may be a posture or a pose that I am inclined to adopt. It's a tendency that I have, and I think there's value to it. I can definitely see some cons or minuses. You know, it's not the greatest thing for every application, but especially if you're trying to gain insight or new perspective, it can be extremely helpful to put yourself into a beginner's mind or disorient yourself so that your assumptions don't hold, or you have to make new ones. Well, he appears. He speaks for himself, and one of the things that jumped out to me was how he uses how he talks about games, and not just in this piece, but in his own work, trying to talk about human psychology. And he is on record, and in this piece, talking about his game, where he wants to be, who he wants to be, what's the game he's playing, and he tells you. Now, we don't know if we can take him at his word, but we have his word. He says that he wants to be the wisest, holiest man. And you're talking about archetypes, like, well, that puts you in league with folks who get scapegoated, get martyred, are misunderstood and glorified simultaneously, and he serves that function in his generation. And I think that is part of the game that he announces he's playing. Yeah, wisest, holiest man of his generation. And so with that comes people. So you can talk about like his appropriation of Eastern spirituality or religious traditions. You can talk about whether or not what he's doing is really scientific. And I think those things are bound up in the answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. A mashup?
Well, for me, it was specifically Black Panthers and Timothy Leary. And I think Timothy Leary was a proxy for psychedelia in general. And the Black Panthers were kind of a proxy for perhaps a more policy-oriented political revolution. So if Leary is saying, detached from social and material struggle, and the Panthers are saying, we have material needs and we need political reform, well, is there a way that these can come together, can reinforce one another? On a surface level, obviously not, because they clearly contradict. But in terms of what else they bring to the table, I think there's plenty there where that there's plenty of common ground to be found. Yeah. Right. I mean, the Frankfurt School is something that has informed my outlook. So indirectly, it must have informed how I put this together. But Eros and Civilization is not quoted, so it's all indirect. Thank you. I'll take that compliment. And I think that it trusts the listener to kind of connect those dots, because that's what that's what this is all about. Because I could easily just say, well, it's good to have integration between your blah blah blah, and to get sort of preachy or abstract, or but to really say well, here are these things that contrast, but to juxtapose them, it allows you to say well, wait a second, I understand both of these things, and I don't have to pick a side, and I think that's very powerful. I do. I did not. I did not incorporate those sources.
Interesting. Was that this decision, because they definitely were the closest to kind of bringing together, some of these two sides. And I wondered, did you decide to leave it out, or was it more?
I had so much source material, just focusing on the initial inspiration. I think you're right. I think that if you were to say, okay, show me historically an example where this did happen. So if instead of being speculative, I was looking for a literal historical answer, I think that's a great candidate. Mm-hmm. For my purposes, I think I may have tried to stay a little closer to my initial inspiration. And maybe that's just me honoring my own fantasies to some extent. But maybe that's maybe there's a sequel or another inspiration in the works I say in the works metaphorically, like that might be a good place to start for something else or for someone else to do. I mean, I think that empirically, we respond, our cognition, the way that our cognition tends to work responds to contrast. And with,
because from an artistic point of view, I mean, that's a classic strategy.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, I think depending on like where in the academy you start from, you can arrive at that conclusion. So if you're doing experiments on cognition, you could say, oh, it turns out that that's the case. And if you're analyzing artwork or producing artwork or art criticism, you can recognize, oh, that's the case. So that, to me, it's like, oh yeah, these different roads will lead to that Rome. The only original sound is the opening Frere Jacques. I recorded that. It's not me singing, but I recorded it. Everything else isn't. So one could argue that it's all appropriated, and that I don't. And I would be willing to concede that in a certain context, like okay, that yes, I mean I didn't make it, I took it. I don't feel that my perceived racial identity or like a racial identity that I would adopt would entitle me to certain appropriations and not others. It's intentional recontextualization.
Yeah.
And so I think anyone whose voice is in this work could fairly say that that's not what I meant. That doesn't accurately represent me. Yeah, that would be fair. And I think with this in particular, it blurs fact and fiction. I mean, it's fictitious, but the resemblance to actual people and events is intentional. So
reached out to you with these concerns? Or?
No, these I'm inflicting them on myself. It's encouraging if you see the sort of utopian vision as something worth pursuing. I mean, it suggests that the conditions could be there for something to happen, and maybe even on this earth, that you wouldn't have to take it to space. And so that's really encouraging. And I think, there's that idea of having a fantasy projection when you don't necessarily perceive or anticipate a lot of real world possibilities. But to hear you say, hey, there are actually some real world possibilities that reflect this fantasy, that's an extremely encouraging viewpoint. Well, you had mentioned a tarot card earlier, and I guess the image that flashed into my mind just now is the idea that it's like there's this seed that some of us have within us, and then we're sort of groping unknowingly toward it. And maybe that's what you're describing, is that these public figures have given voice to this vision, or this dream seed, or whatever you want to call it, for a different way of living. And yeah, I think with cutting out the excess, you could highlight that when those instances when it has been given voice.
Yeah.
Well, there's that old journalistic saw that most errors are errors of overspecification. So the idea that by omitting some words, you could significantly increase the palatability or inspirational quality it makes sense to me. And then I think as well, you had mentioned like it's an essentially an environmentally, it's a statement that has something to do with environmental cataclysm or overcoming it. And it makes me wonder to what extent there might be part of what might be fueling an unconscious fueling of the investment in that ideology could be this anxiety about the cataclysm.